much. And thanks everybody for joining today. This is the Personal and Collaborative Knowledge Graph Workshop. And we've got some esteemed guests who have a lot of experience in related areas here. I'm Alan Morris, and I'm in my basement in the southern side of Silicon Valley. And I'm joined by Jerry Michalski of Rex. And hi, Jerry. And you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure, happy to. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I'm actually the founder of Open Global Mind, which is the more relevant organization here, and have been feeding a mind map for 24 years. We'll get to that in a little bit.
Thanks, Jerry. And Ivo, welcome to you too, and we're grateful to have you. Can you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a consultant and trainer on knowledge graphs and management. My interest in knowledge management is old, around 25 years old, and I've been working with knowledge graphs professionally in the last 10 years, and in the last 2 with personal knowledge graphs.
Super. And you're joining us from Leuven in Belgium, and Jerry's joining from Portland. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi, everyone.
You want to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Jeff Tang. I'm the founder of Athens Research, calling in from Miami, North Beach right now. And Athens is a startup about a year and 9 months old. We're focused on helping individuals and teams solve complex problems using end user knowledge graphs. So, yeah, that's us.
Super, super. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. And clicking on share screen now. Let me see. Let's see.
It is still loading.
Alan, do you receive some kind of a prompt for audio video activation or for screen sharing activation?
Or to pick which screen to share?
Exactly.
Window. Oh, okay, here we go. Yep. I'm trying to find the window that I've got open, but it's adjacent in another tab.
Share your whole screen and
then
you can
see here. Here we go. All right. And you're seeing something now, I'm hoping?
Yes.
All right. And you're seeing the slideshow version of that?
You are rocking.
All right. Super. So we've got a couple of hours, folks, to talk about personal knowledge graphs. It's an emerging area. We're not going to be advocating any particular direction. As a matter of fact, we've got people who are looking at different directions in bringing knowledge graphs together. And the whole idea behind a knowledge graph, of course, is to de-silo and to work outside of the tribes, outside of the silos. So we've got some good folks to help us with that. Jerry and Jeff and Ivo have introduced themselves. We're going to be spending maybe the first hour on just level setting and what everybody's been up to and how it relates to the bigger picture here. And then we'll have a full hour for Q&A and discussion. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if you all have questions during the first hour or even in the second hour, I'll read the questions in the chat as they come up to the extent that I can. So it's a really informal discussion. We're hoping people can help us be interactive, and we're really interested in questions as well as our vantage point on this, because we don't claim to be omniscient here. The goal of today's workshop is to, like I said, to discuss the complementary knowledge graph directions, personal knowledge graphs versus knowledge graphs on the enterprise side, for example. And I mentioned PKGs are not mature, so this is not going to be a tutorial. This is not going to be, we're going to have some demos for sure, but it's not, you know, here's this approach and here's how you use this. there are various approaches that we're going to open up and take a look at. And so Ivo and I are going to establish the lay of the land first. And then Jerry and Jeff are going to help us sort of unpack the different directions that could be complementary to the orthodox direction that Ivo and I know best. And so that's the goal today. And so George had asked me to just do an overview of what we consider a knowledge graph to be. And so I think that the important points that I've seen over the years that seem relevant to those who are just getting into the topic is that we're able to integrate all sorts of different data in a knowledge graph. It's not just tabular data, it's not just structured data, it's all sorts of data, multimedia, numerical data, text, content. We consider content to be data. It's all accessible via a knowledge graph. What we're trying to do with a knowledge graph is to make all this disparate data, once it's integrated, human and machine readable. So we're trying to harness machines so they can help us out with discovery and integration and interoperation. And in the process, what we're trying to do is disambiguate entities. And so we've got entities and relationships in the graph, and with the help of definition language and things like description logic and NLP, we're hoping to contextualize and disambiguate what's in this graph so that it's navigable, so that people can find what they're looking for ideally quickly and harness that. So we're not just looking for our keys under the lamppost because that's where the light is. And ultimately, what the vision is, big time, is that knowledge graphs are going to become a base for digital twins and the larger ecosystem. And we'll be talking about the social interaction ecosystem, the collective brain later on. But there are already large knowledge graphs out there, as you know, DBpedia, Wikipedia, KBpedia, the Blue Brain, which Blue Brain Nexus is a graph that's associated with the Blue Brain project that looks at reverse engineering the brain. So it's a collaborative environment for that purpose. We've got DiffBot on the e-commerce side that's totally automated. We've got the healthcare knowledge graphs like Montefiore Health that are doing predictive analytics and sort of marrying the statistical side with the symbolic logic or description logic side of things. And there's all the tech sector knowledge graphs that you're familiar with, from Google and Facebook to eBay and Airbnb. You just mention your online web-based company. If they're large, they're probably going to have a knowledge graph either for things like product catalogs or things like multi-domain chatbots, for example. So, we're headed toward integration and even interoperation. And for digital twins, there's got to be interoperation. We're headed toward different development models. And so in the knowledge graph, we've got ontologies that facilitate the reuse of logic that has been trapped in applications. So you've got a shallower application stack that's emerging, and you've got smaller, thinner applications that are basically executable that run on top of this knowledge graph. And then there's a platform, in essence, where you're marrying symbolic logic from rules to declarations with the statistical machine learning. So those two are complementary, and you're seeing more and more of that marriage emerging, although we're still struggling with silos. And on the personal side of things, we're looking at personal data. The research use case is huge here, whether it's collecting links and making them discoverable in your own environment or collaborating with others. On the note-taking side, you've got this journaling approach to note-taking, the creative sharing and productivity that we'll be talking about. And it's knowledge management that starts with the individual, and hopefully we're going from a more siloed approach to de-siloing, and along those lines we can take advantage of decentralized data protection so that people can actually control more of their data and control the access control for that. So why do we care about semantics, relationships, and dynamic graph data models? It's because, you know, how things are connected is really important. And that's my take and Evo's on this. We've got the potential of ontologies and inferencing, you know, data models that are flexible and that are extensible and sort of self-describing and self-extensible in some ways. And so we're trying to bridge the gap between human and machine intelligence. And then, you know, personal knowledge graphs, by contrast with the enterprise side, we're just getting started with adding a bit of logic to the graph so that, you know, we've got some models, for example, in our working group, Margaret Warren, who's in charge of image snippets, has got the orthodox model for a personal knowledge graph, and she's managed images for many years using a very slim ontology. And so we're trying to build these contexts with the help of this approach, and so at the core of it is the verbs that connect the nodes or the noun, so to speak. And so if Ian knows Mary, then you know, you could elaborate how Ian got to know Mary. Maybe they rode the same bus together. Maybe Mary and Ian work in the same building, but they didn't realize it. You know, there are those kinds of things that can be surfaced with this approach. And so contextualization is really key here. The thing about logic is that there's a lot of inertia. And if you look at this diagram, which I've been using for a long time now, you've got intelligence on the horizontal axis with smarts on the right-hand side. And then you've got on the vertical axis, you've got the degree of semantics. So the more semantic interoperability there is, the more machines are able to talk the same lingo we are and sort of break down and establish the commonality between the participants in this graph and in this world of digital twins, the more powerful it can be. But the thing is that you need to have more logic accessible to everybody. And that's what this graph shows, is the upper right is really higher order logic, and we're just not there yet. Evo has been working with OWL and Datalog, for example. The folks at Relational AI are working with Datalog, but most of the inertia is down in the lower left here with simple lists and folksonomies and controlled vocabularies. And so the struggle is, you know, how do you get just enough logic into the graph to make it useful, but not overwhelm people? And at the same time, how do we make progress with that? So machines and humans have to work together in a better way to get this to happen. Some of you may have heard about Web 3.0, and I just wanted to clarify that we have a broader vision of Web 3.0 than what you might hear of on social media, for example. When you see the term Web 3.0 in Twitter, for example, a lot of people are talking about the transactional environment, the blockchain, digital currencies. They're talking about tokenizations, smart contracts, and they're sort of pointing to that as the silver bullet. Well, our point of view is that the social interaction side of this, the broader collaboration that's promised via P2P data networks such as IPFS, is really where a lot of the power lies. And you've got a simplified development stack and a lot of potential for ease of use and a simplification in terms of the coding that's done. So I tried to write about that in my blog at Data Science Central. So decentralization is, why do we care about it? Is because it's a window of opportunity for us to start controlling our own data and protecting it. And it's a means of getting beyond application silos and just getting to a data sharing environment where we're sharing all sorts of things together and unpacking what exists and making it more accessible. And along those lines, there's all the regulations about personally identifiable information. And so we're trying to get people aligned with starting to protect their own personal data and take custody of it. There has to be ownership here if that's going to happen. And so also trying to get businesses to stop collecting so much personally identifiable information. If you can control it and you've got decentralized approaches to identity, you can make it so that businesses don't have to collect these correlatable identifiers. So the vulnerabilities would be much less inside those businesses. So there's a risk reason for businesses not to collect personal data. And so, like I said, our working group is trying to look at a simple approach to this, easier integration, an ability to manage and control personal data. We're trying to build bridges to network note-taking in the open web. We're trying to work with NLP and more automation, and we're looking at decentralized storage and data security. And this Friday, our working group, if you're interested, is going to be talking about Yuri Laios' approach to using IPFS and fission in his nascent product. So ping me if you're interested. So that's the overview, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and so wondering if there's been any questions to date that we could answer here. And panel, do you have any comments on just the overview and your takeaways from it? Nada. So Ivo, you want to talk about your vantage point on personal knowledge graphs?
Yeah, I'll be very short. I would like to leave more time for demonstrations and discussion. But before I share how I see the evolution of this thing, maybe, I don't know how many people that joined this session, for them, this is a new topic or something that they know about, but maybe for those that is a bit new, just to give some idea of how to see this, the potential of that. So if we just imagine two devices for managing personal information, like this one, which is a phone book, and a device with a similar size, which is this one. So basically, in both we have personal information, like a phone book, and they have similar size. So I think that for those that have managed their personal information with knowledge graphs, they would agree with me that it feels like using this device compared to that for any other way of managing personal information. And that, I think, is not an exaggeration. So I will share my screen just to say a few words how I see, mostly architecturally, the evolution of these things in a few words. So share screen. And I'm actually doing the presentation from my knowledge graph. So basically, I believe that we currently have knowledge graphs, personal knowledge graphs, because as Alan said, our information is in silos. So we have documents, bookmarks, what have you, everywhere dispersed, and they are linked. They are linked, but we keep these links in our head. This is what I call tacit personal knowledge graphs, or the first way of personal knowledge graphs. And in the last 2 years, 3 years, we see this eruption of various personal knowledge graph applications. So why would we call them personal knowledge graph applications? They're personal knowledge management tools, and the other way that they referred to recently is tools for thought. But the most successful of them, they treat the data, this conceptually, as a knowledge graph. So in that sense, I believe we are now somewhere here. And that is probably exaggeration, because I think this is much, much bigger, where most people do not use that. But interestingly, while we are on the rise with this wave, also the third wave is starting. And let me just quickly compare how do I see the difference between these three waves. So we have a situation with the first wave where we are struggling to integrate applications. We have things in Word documents, in our email, bookmarks, note-taking applications, Excel sheets, and social media and Twitter, and somehow also our research data in Zotero and different tools, and all that we somehow try to integrate, and we do, but when it grows, we cannot really maintain much in our head, and that's why we start to look for ways to have these relationships explicit, like Jerry's doing for so many years now. And then it's the second stage of the powerful personal knowledge management systems, where we have the data somehow treated as a graph. It could be physically stored in different ways, but somehow it is treated as a graph, but it is coupled with the application. And there are many things that these applications are missing, but most of them are open to an ecosystem of extensions and plugins. They're not always very pretty, but they provide what this application is missing. And I think we are moving towards a third wave, where we have data decoupled from applications, and overall it is going to a decentralized model, what Alan referred to as the Web3. That I think would be something important for this space. So maybe the importance of today's extensions will grow, and they will be the actual applications, but they're going only to visit our graph, and they should have a way to seamlessly integrate with it without actually be coupled in any sense of the word, and also integrate with each other. And when I say a personal knowledge graph, it doesn't really mean that it is something also stored in one place. It could be different parts of it stored in different places. And here things like IPFS and DWeb and similar approaches would play a role. But it is experienced as something coherent. So that's I would call a D stage for things that are going more flexible, they're decoupled, decentralized. in various dimensions. So these were a few things that I wanted to share, just to suggest how things are probably evolving from what I have observed so far. So I'm going now to stop sharing.
Alan, you're muted. Alan, you're muted, and now you're muted again. There you go.
So, Ivo, can you sort of summarize what you've just presented here? What's the takeaway the audience should be able to ponder at this point?
I think that there are two important considerations, apart from all the functionalities that could be taken from the personal knowledge management systems. And one of them is, do we control our data, and in what way? And the other is how we could have different parts of our graph in different places, and yet seamlessly experienced as a single thing, and also how we can integrate our personal knowledge graph, or parts of it that we want to integrate with other personal knowledge graphs, so that we can collaborate and share knowledge.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we had a question in the chat that had to do with, well, Peter made the comment that graph to me is just anything that has links between items. And so a lot depends on what's in these links and how we're disambiguating the entities or the items so that they can be integrated, correct? Ivo?
The value of this ambiguation is growing when we have to share and collaborate.
Yeah.
So to a large extent, as long as we use our own data, that is not unimportant, because when it grows, still we would benefit from this ambiguating for querying and other purposes. But it becomes critical when we start sharing and integrating our graph with others. And in terms of what is a knowledge graph, I personally started using that around 10 years ago, including enterprise knowledge graph. But although I promote it and I really believe it's something very powerful, I really use knowledge, a knowledge graph, metaphorically. I believe knowledge is something that that people can get. Only people can know. Somebody needs to. A knower is knowing, and in that sense, having explicit semantics and managing as a graph, because it's an abstraction that could integrate easily any kind of data structure, is incredibly useful. But it doesn't store knowledge inside. We have the knowledge. We can have more benefit by integrating with it. But other than that, I believe it's just a metaphor, knowledge graph.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think that enterprise seems to be well ahead of the consumer side on this. At least when it comes to what large companies have to do to manage their information these days. So what Ivo and I are advocating here is that at least the enterprise side illuminates what's in the realm of necessity and what's possible. And then sort of sets the stage for the orthodox side of knowledge graphs. And we're going to turn next to more of a heterodox side, I'd call it, but it's much more user friendly, let's say, and it's a way to get started. And so, Jerry, you want to talk about your approach with the brain and your journey, which has been quite a while in the making, where you are right now?
Happy to, thanks. So I used to be a tech industry.
Maybe give us a demo.
Yeah. I used to be a tech industry trends analyst, not a Wall Street analyst, because I don't care and couldn't tell you how the earnings were going to be next quarter or whatever. But I was advising, multinationals and the industry about, is AI going to kill us or save us? But more precisely, like I'd get a call from an insurance company that would say, how do we use neural networks? And I was sort of on duty talking about neural networks in 1990. So one of the little companies that comes through my office in the 12 years I was doing that had a piece of software called the brain. And I have a vivid memory of the first time I saw the brain, and I'm going to share my screen now so you can all see it. Let me know when you're viewing it. And so the inventor of the brain, this guy named Harlan Hugh, opens his laptop and shows me something that looks not too different from what I'm showing you right now, and that's 24 years ago. So I've turned my brain to personal knowledge graphs, which is connected to knowledge graphs, and also personal knowledge management, personal knowledge networks, distributed knowledge graphs, et cetera, et cetera. There are many categories I've been following for a really long time. So here's the general idea of knowledge graphs, which I have under types of graphs, and I'm not an ontologist or a logician or a lawyer or a doctor or any of those kinds of things. But I just wanted to show you around this brain tool. But also to preface this by saying, so what I'm going to show you is quirky and personal and is about my personal use of a tool that fits how I represent things. And I really like what Ellen and Ivo said a moment ago, which is, and I'm interpreting, Ivo, sort of the third stage of where you were heading was, hey, these tools aren't that important. And if, as Yuri said in the chat, if we separate the data from the tools, we can then shift between the tools while curating a shared space of knowledge that we ought to have. And one of my beliefs, one of the reasons I feel strongly about all this stuff, is that I think civilization is worse off because we don't have a shared memory of what we believe and what we know. We've outsourced our memories to Google and Wikipedia, and I love Google and Wikipedia both, but that's a big mistake to think that, oh, I don't need to store that and curate that because I'll just Google for it later. That's a huge mistake. So this idea of using personal knowledge graphs, or whatever you want to call it, I mean, there's also dynamic knowledge repositories where Jack Park has been laboring for longer than I have. And there's also lots of subcategories of topic maps and context maps, and a lot of people who know a lot more academically about these than I do. What I'm showing you here is a tool that has a couple of very simple representational schemes that let me make my own knowledge graph. And I will say that personal knowledge graphs to me is a very limiting phrase because I'm really, really interested in the shared distributed knowledge graph. I am sort of a prisoner of a tool that's, for me, really great at representing what's in my head out in the world and what I see, and not so great at building a shared space where we can each have our own maps of what we believe, but then mingle our maps together, which is kind of where I'm going. So I have a thought here. Every node in the brain is called a thought. You'll notice that the thoughts are not sprinkled around one another kind of randomly. There's an order to how they're sprinkled, which is an order that I particularly like. So here's a thought I created for today's panel. This is CDW21 PKG panel. Here is the link for the conference. Anywhere you see a fav icon connected to a thought, that means that I've connected a link to a website. So there's a URL connected to the whole conference. Here, there's a URL connected to this particular session. Those are different URLs. And then I noticed in the chat that Katarina, Kari, and Veronique had joined up, so I added them to my brain. You are now brain famous. Yuri I already knew, so if I click on Yuri, we will go find him under trail marks, and everything is deeply intertwined, a phrase that was inspiring for him, and a bunch of other kinds of things. And if I go back to today's conference, you'll also see that the other panelists are in here. So I've got Jeff, for example, with his LinkedIn profile connected to him, connected to Athens Research. His Twitter profile is here as well, his Twitter account. And then Athens is linked under open source Rome alternatives. And if I go there, you should find, and I'm sorry, my machine is doing a few too many things all at once. So there's open source Rome, Rome versus Obsidian, and a bunch of other kinds of things up here. So I've been feeding this mind map for 24 years, meaning the map I'm showing you right now is the same map that I started when I met Harlan, and he showed me, he demoed for me this software. And I was like, oh, this sounds cool. I think I'll start using it. And at the time, I was a tech industry trends analyst. So I cared a lot about, what companies compete with what other companies. So if I go to, I can jump to any thought I want by just typing into the search box. So I'm jumping, I just typed in KM tools, and I'm going to select KM tools and environments. So for the 24 years I've been using the brain, here are some of the knowledge management tools that I've seen. Meta, and I don't remember putting these in. Metacarta, Hyperwave, I do remember Introspect, DKA, Autonomy I remember, because I was friends with the founder, correlate.com, etc. And then there's a subcategory here of enterprise knowledge graphs. So if I go there, and then this is not an official ontology or taxonomy. This is just me, an amateur, with a passion for these things, creating subcategories and curating slowly over time. And I'll say one more thing, and then I'll pause for questions and for other people to jump in, and for Jeff to show his particular tool and environment. But one of the interesting things is that when you're connecting things into a persistent knowledge base, it's a different act from starting fresh every day with a new knowledge map of some sort. So when I connected into Guri, I entered Guri some time ago. And so my adding Guri to today's panel call is a very simple gesture. I basically, dragged a line from one of the little gates that lets me connect dots, and I typed in Guri's name and found him and made the connection. But I already had a rich context for Guri, things he's written, his participation on a panel at the Future of Tech Symposium. He and I had a catch-up call, which we recorded and posted online. That's a YouTube link to that call. He's been part of Kiko Lab's Flow Show. I can see, here's his GitHub archive, his GitHub repos and all that. You can see that there's a relationship, a whole bunch of different evidence. And the reason I happen to like this tool called the Brain is that this display makes more sense to me than any other I've seen, and I can't replicate this easily in any other tool I've seen yet. So my passion project, I'm actually going to add one more thing. My passion project since the beginning of lockdown is this thing called Open Global Mind, and trying to figure out, what does that shared space look like? What does, in fact, a space within which we can use our preferred tools, but then collect up together into a collective memory, a shared memory that will help us not be spun so fast. I think that actors like Donald Trump are able to spin us quickly because we don't have a shared memory. We don't agree on what we've seen and what we know, for example. So I'll hit pause.
Really nice summary of your journey there, Jerry. And I'm wondering, what kinds of success are you seeing with your collaboration side of your projects?
So it's interesting. We haven't built an all singing, all dancing new platform that does all these things. We're trying really hard to find other entities and organizations that care about the collaboration, bridging across, which is why I'm really happy to be in this panel, because I think that the general instinct and energy here is sort of to figure out, what does this synthetic, syncretic, collective, collaborative effort to build a shared memory look like? And I think that's hugely important to the world. Then we have sub-projects inside of Open Global Mind, and in those we've created a couple of things that will For example, Pete Kaminsky, who is a longtime friend of mine and who was one of the founders of Social Text, which was a wiki sales company back in the noughties, I guess. I'm forgetting the dates here. But Pete has been a core member of Open Global Mind, and he is busy reinventing the wiki, lying on top of Markdown files. Now, Markdown files aren't perfect, but Markdown files in repos that are publicly available are really, really excellent public information. And you can layer metadata on and around Markdown files using YAML or other sorts of things. And how you do that is a few grades beyond my pay grade, because I'm not actually a programmer geek. I'm a thinking geek and connector geek. And then Giri's saying, let's put the data out in IPFS. There's also a sync thing and a bunch of other ways that you can actually create distributed data that works. So we're busy experimenting with those things and doing really amateur things, like we'll have a conversation around some topic and invite people to use whatever tool they feel like to annotate that topic and then share the results of how they mapped that conversation. And I'm right now standing up a new podcast called Weaving the World, where we're trying to do
So in that sense,
go ahead.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And there's a question here, which is, does the PKG replace a personal information management app like Things, Evernote, Dropbox, OmniFocus, DevonThink? You know, it sounds like we're trying to build a Swiss Army knife so that these things can be all utilized in some fashion together, at least some of them. Can you just sort of elaborate, Jerry, on that?
Yeah, and I think my answer will be partly colored by my own quirks in using the Brain software. So the Brain supports link types, thought types, and it has a little notes field connected to every thought, so you could type in notes. Because when I started using it 24 years ago, I was very aware of how indexes grow really big, like way too fast. I started using it in kind of a minimalist way. So I don't really use the notes field very much. I don't take my daily notes or meeting notes into the notes field in the Brain, but I could. And I was a long-time Evernote user and gave up on it recently, and I've switched over, believe it or not, to Keep, basically Google Keep, the notes feature built into Chrome. And things like that, which I can't easily connect to the Brain. So there's like this gap between my daily notes and how I'm using the Brain. I also use, Contacts Plus is my contact manager, so I don't do all my contacts in the Brain. I don't write articles by outlining in the Brain. I'll use, I'll go over to Google Docs and I'll have a link to the Google Doc in my Brain, so I can find the document I was working on before, and I'll find all the resources to feed the document in my Brain and then add to it and curate. But I won't actually outline and write a brand new document in my Brain. I don't use it as the daily outliner either, which I could, and many people do. So I think my use of it is pretty quirky in those ways. I'm dying to have the Brain be more open. There's no API to it right now, because the fact that I never used link types and thought types isn't because I hate metadata. It's because I have a belief that every additional step that it takes you to enter any piece of information drastically reduces the likelihood that you're going to try entering information. I call this the law of convenience. I wrote about it in like 2000 or so. And so you have to chuck overboard all of the overhead that adds a lot of cruft and time to just quickly doing jujitsu on incoming information, connecting, linking, sharing, all that kind of stuff. Right? Yeah. And so I'm dying for AI or machine learning to take a look at my Brain and say, hey, Jerry, that looks like an author and her books. Do you mind if I tag them as such with metadata? And then would it be okay if I added her other 5 books? A task that I perform now completely manually, because even though this thing is called the Brain, it has 0 AI. There's no machine learning in the Brain. It's Photoshop for ideas. That's it. Right? Yeah. So I'm really interested in this next stage tool that allows me to preserve what I love about this one, but then lets me get into the shared space where Jeff and I can play with what he's recording in Athens, and we can sort of couple that. And I'll add that the notes field in the Brain, in the last rev of it, version 12 of the Brain, includes Roam-like features in the notes field, which I don't use and haven't really experimented with yet. But I'm extremely interested in how my graph, which is very much about words and short phrases, connects up to other graphs that are about blocks of text and other graphs that are about pages of text and other graphs, like each of us has these quirky understandings about what is the unit, the essential unit of knowledge, how do we manifest links, how do these things work together? And some of us are really interested in how do we dissolve that down to a common substrate of rich information that is very, very like richly linked and contextualized. Nora Bateson has this idea of warm data that understands what its context is, super great things. We're nowhere near having this, but I think that many of us have this intentionality. We're heading in that general direction.
Yeah.
And I would love to preserve the wild proliferation of tools so that people can find their way to the tool that really works for them. Because I'm discovering that this thing that works for me, maybe it works for 15% of the human population, and the rest of the people look at it and they scratch their heads and they go, man, that's a lot of stuff. I don't really know what to do with it.
Yeah, if we're going to be inclusive, we have to be embracing and extending rather than excluding. So very, very nice overview and some really good comments there, Jerry. And you mentioned Jeff's approach. And Jeff, you want to just give us a thumbnail sketch of what you're up to this year and how Athens is going, and give us a demo and sort of the same kind of approach that Jerry was taking?
Yeah, sure. So this year's been going good. This year in March or April, we did a startup accelerator called Y Combinator, raised like a seed round, and have just been building since then. We started off pretty personal, like personal knowledge management, like very much not adding any collaborative features. And that's how we started, I guess, this year. But since then, really the past 6 months, we've been working hard at collaboration. And I'm happy to show off a little demo of Athens and what we have today.
Okay.
Awesome. You guys see this?
It's loading. There we go. Let's see.
Awesome. So this is a screen share of Athens. This is actually the collaborative version of Athens. So this is the one that actually we use with the team. And I'm accessing this from my Mac. Alex, who's one of our engineers, is on this page. He's in the conference right now. And you can see that he's on this specific block. And we've actually been taking notes on this talk, throughout the talk, on what people have been saying. Like, these are the participants. Alan, Ivo, Jerry, and me have a link to Alan's his PowerPoint slide. Noted, we brought up Geary, Vision Codes, and IPFS. Had a link to Ivo's blog, Evo's blog, some notes on what Jerry was talking about. And I think there's always a good opportunity to do good user research. Just taking notes on how he's using the brain, how he describes it, some of the pains that he has using the brain, and some questions that he brought up, like, is it possible to build a common interoperable substrate between Athens and the brain? And there's a big spectrum when we talk about knowledge graphs. We don't have formal semantics or logic yet. Really, all we're doing is allowing users to very easily link their knowledge. So again, pretty amateurish, as Jerry said. We're not doing anything crazy, nothing like formally. But we could we could see engineering. We actually just stand up today. I mean, I wasn't there. Alex was there. Philippe was there. Sid was there. And we could go click on this page and see all the mentions of the engineering stand-ups. And so here are the stand-ups that the engineering team has been doing. We could jump around and see that, okay? And they did it on all these days. We could jump to the retrospective that we've been doing hard this week and how we've actually been doing it across multiple weeks. We've done previous engineering retrospectives. We could see, which ones that Alex authored, or we could go to the Alex page and just see like the things that he authored, which we're doing manually right now by having an Alex page. But yeah, I mean, this is really the extent of knowledge graph that we have. It's not so much coming up with super rich metadata yet, describing types. There's no types of entities yet, or types of links. There's just bidirectional links, and there's just pages. and blocks. Like those are the entities and basic types in our system. Nothing rich or formal yet. A lot of that data is just being drawn back up implicitly based off of text and the surrounding context. So in some sense, yeah, like it doesn't have those formal logic capabilities yet. And it allows for real-time collaboration, and in that way it's collaborative. And in terms of answering this question that's been coming up a lot today, of like how do we build something common and interoperable? We're not using Markdown. A lot of the personal knowledge management tools are, and I think that that's a great format because it allows you to switch between tools. You're not locked into one. It allows you to take your data elsewhere and use multiple tools on the same data. However, there are limitations there. Like it's hard to build a collaborative application or a rich application using Markdown. Markdown is pretty much used by developers and pretty technical folks, and you can't just build like a modern web application just with Markdown. That being said, we did end up building a protocol, a pretty generic protocol for this knowledge graph, this graph that we have today, such that you could use any backend if you implemented about 12 basic functions, and that we could also build different interfaces on top. So someone asked about visual graphs. We do have a visual graph. It's not super powerful yet. You can't generate, I don't believe you can create connections between the graph or generate new nodes through the graph. But there isn't anything stopping us from doing that, such that we could have different interfaces to Athens, and we could probably even build, we could even build a messaging application, maybe our own email client, our own bookmarking tool that is native and is pretty familiar. And it's like, oh, it looks like Slack, it looks like Teams, it looks like Discord or Telegram or iMessage. Build that same interface, but then have that interoperate with the Athens protocol. Our goal isn't to just like create this protocol that everyone eventually uses. I don't think people are just going to do that right away. But at least within our suite of applications and our product vision, we hope to allow more of that flexibility. So yeah, that's a quick tour of Athens.
So yeah, I really get where you're going here, Jeff, and I'm wondering, what's the community dynamic that you're seeing with your approach? Are you seeing things that were surprising to you, or that would be surprising to us?
Surprising about the community or the product, or
the collaboration approach that you're starting to support this year?
Yeah, so we had our first party, you could say, a launch party last week, actually, 6 days ago on Thursday, on Thanksgiving Day. It was pretty fun. And we had, I guess, 50 plus people join the call, 30 people in the graph itself. And maybe I can switch to that now, just so you guys can see what it looks like.
Let's see what happened there.
Let's see if it's up. We might have taken down just to look at the logs and see what's going on. Okay, no, it's still up. Cool. This is really exciting to share because you can see how people use the product without any instructions. So this is the Thanksgiving Day. This is the Thanksgiving Day graph. So yeah, people joined, and eventually we had 30 people on this toolbar that just showed everyone there. We had a brief agenda, and then these are the people that just dropped their names in and add their own feedback. So some of you guys might recognize them, like Cortex Futura, Brandon Toner. These people all write a lot, blogging and tweeting a lot about personal knowledge graphs and just knowledge management in general. And you can see like the feedback they have, and you can see kind of like the conventions that people start following without even any instructions. Like, okay, this is inbox or an outbox. We don't have those as like features yet. But people are already using it as such, where like, hey, write a message to here if you want. And then you can see conversations happening between people just very organically.
If you don't mind, I've got a question for Jeff.
Go ahead.
I love the sort of group note-taking, the collective note-taking here. It's really compelling. And one of the questions that comes up for me is there's a big difference to me between notes and curated content. And somehow you have to pare back on the notes, and you have to move things around and clean them up, and and then say, oh, let's just have this little piece represent a lot more in the final map. Otherwise you have everything that ever got said and note taken, you know, during every meeting showing up concurrently as you sit there doing things. How does that work? How do you see that moving forward? Because you know, I have obviously this gap between where I actually sort of take notes and I'm actively taking notes in the brain as well, but in a different way. I'm curating. I'm not doing what got said during the meeting.
Yeah. So to rephrase the question, is the question like how do we go from like personal, you know, it's like stream of thought, stream of consciousness kind of thing, to something that's more external, more legible to others,
and more durable, more synthesized, more crystalline, more clear? Yeah. How do you sift through and synthesize to go up a level? One of the problems I have with the Rome Athens model is that whenever a word or phrase becomes a link, becomes a backlink, when you go to that backlink, everything you've connected to it shows up, and you don't get to choose what doesn't show up there. It's like everything you've connected to that phrase, and if it's a popular backlink, that thing gets really big really fast.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think we all have our own personal Athenses already, or like personal knowledge graphs, and you know, we'll switch to the shared one when we want to do something collaboratively, like taking meeting notes or like, you know, running a product meeting. And then at that point, we might like pull in some of our notes and, you know, reformat them, reshape them. I think like crossing the chasm between the personal and collaborative to go from like, you know, your own head to you know, legible to the external world is just one of those things that isn't as, I mean, I guess there are ways we could design for that by making it easy to pull that data in and like shape it to be more legible to others. But it's kind of like the same question of like, okay, how do I like reformat this like fuzzy idea in my head to like into like just like words, into like a sentence? It's quite difficult, and it's just you kind of just have a different mode of writing, like when you're writing a team document versus like a personal.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the lines of what Jerry is here, Jeff, and you know, my thought is that people will talk at different altitudes, so to speak. And so Jerry's very much at a higher altitude than what the general note-taking is. And you're just basically getting stuff out there with the note-taking. And then, you know, you could go back and add layers to it if you wanted to, or you could probably harness machines in some way to build those abstraction layers so that you've got, well, ontologists would call it more of an upper ontology, you know. And that way, once you've got that layered approach, then the discoverability is richer, and you could put more things in the view that Jerry was coming up with in the graph, you know, so that you could have dimensions in the graph that could be more helpful to humans as well. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but
I guess, I mean, could you ask the question just one more time for me?
yeah, so go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, sorry. It's a little bit about different levels or altitudes or levels of abstraction, as Alan is describing. But I'm kind of mixing levels of abstraction sometimes. So for instance, I read Heather Cox Peterson's newsletter this morning, and she was talking about Mark Meadows. And there was a sentence in her post that I copied exactly under my link to her post in my brain connected to Mark Meadows. So it wasn't like I was like everything that I put in the brain is up at some level of abstraction. It's kind of, I'm playing back and forth with actual facts and quotes and citations, but I'm curating tons. I'm increasingly aware of how much I'm curating as I feed my brain, because I want the brain to still make sense as it accrues a lot of cruft. But then the idea of having power notes and like really superpowered note taking is very compelling. And I think I'm exploring that boundary between the notes that are repetitive, because we have the same conversation 5 times in a week sometimes. If a topic is hot, it'll come up a lot, right? And so you'll have 5 sets of notes that are all kind of backlinked there. And it may be that we have to switch tools sometimes to synthesize. It may be that we have to create a separate subset document that is the summary document or the précis, or I don't know what to call it. But I'm really interested, as you pioneer the way into shared note-taking with a backlink-rich tool, you're going to hit this. And I'm really curious about how you resolve it, or what questions come up, or what other people feel about it.
So I think that because of just like the way notes are, they can be very flexible. Like you could have one note just be complete babble, like nonsense. And like a lot of the notes I take are like that. It's just like backlinks around like Jerry, Jeff, Evo. Like it's not a sentence, right? It's very fleeting, ephemeral. And they're just like anchors, like footholds to like remember like things to point back to like in the future, like links to go to. So it's almost like a capture tool. And then some nodes can end up being evergreen or like atomic nodes, or like maybe like Zettelkasten type nodes, where it's like you're trying to make it durable, you're trying to make it useful over long periods of time. And not everyone takes notes that way, but like that, some of your notes might end up being one of those notes, even if you don't intend for it to like crystallize in that way, just because it's like ends up being so canonical to yourself or to your team. I think that in this case, what you're describing like is what we're describing internally as like these different layers of energy levels like associated with the information. And what we mean by that is that like when we're having chat on Teams, Slack, Discord, and like even the chat like going on right now in the live webinar, like that's like low viscosity, like high entropy information. And it's like, okay, well, it's not super deep. It's quite energetic, and you know, but it's just back and forth, very like, oh, what is this? What's that? Like send me the link to that. And then we have something that a layer above, which is maybe just the note-taking app. So there's messages in the note-taking app where, you know, it can be a little bit more ephemeral. And then we might have something a little bit more even higher viscosity, like a document, like a memo, like a product spec, these are our vision. This is our product vision. This is our product roadmap. This is our values. And so really like, I think that these note-taking apps can expand to cover a lot of these use cases. But when you're using your note-taking app as a document editor, then eventually you're going to have kind of this trouble that you're coming into, like running into the walls. And like, again, you can see the note-taking app. Sometimes people during the collaboration session is just like, hey, what's this? What's that? It's like, in that case, we're using the note-taking app as a chat application, right? And it's like, it's not really meant for that. It can do that thing. It can do that job. Yeah.
But that winds up staying in the chat. It winds up staying in the document, right?
It ends up staying in the document.
Unless you go back and weed it out.
Unless you format it and do that sort of stuff. And that's, and so for us at least, like I think that one way we could solve that is coming up with those different affordances. Coming up like, and then another layer on top of the document outliner, or maybe the document itself, and maybe we'll support eventually, is like a comment, right? Like this is another layer of energy, of information that can go throughout the entire graph in all documents. And I think for us,
just a brief thought on chats, like the one we have going here. I find chats very rich. So I find them really informal, and they're often just like, yeah, people keeping in touch, but really great links show up in chat. And at the end of a good call, usually in Zoom since lockdown, I will have 10 tabs open in my browser to go back and curate. And the good stuff that I find, I add to my brain in the place where it belongs. So I'm busy, I'm like a little, bee making little hexagons and going, oop, this hexagon goes here. But I do that regularly, rhythmically. And then often what happens is I'll be on calls and somebody will quote something brilliant somebody just said in the chat, kind of to memorialize it a little bit. And I will copy that, paste it, and memorialize that in my brain, where it's like brain famous. And I like to joke that and $4 will get you a coffee at Starbucks. Don't know where it's going. But I think these evanescent forms of communication, if we focus on them well, can actually be really generative and really contribute a lot to the web weaving that we're doing. these become the little trays where we share info.
Yeah, it'd be really helpful to kind of categorize those kinds of different submedia, if you will, that we're trying to harness. And I just wanted to bring Ivo back into the conversation here. And Ivo, you've been listening to Jeff and Jerry and wondering if you had any thoughts on what Jeff has been demoing and Jerry's comments on it.
I've been following mostly the chat. That's quite interesting.
Okay, so you're following the chat, and what are you seeing in the chat that you reacted to?
Yeah, it's interesting ideas indeed. But I have the feeling that because of the origin of many tools that are now popular, being that started from note-taking tools, this use case is perceived as dominant. And I think that is not the case. When you go beyond that, you see, in fact, that yes, you take notes, but that is just part of everything else you do to connect your research, your thoughts, others' ideas, what you find, and the granularity of that and the actual way you would like to make things resurface later, or the managed serendipity that you can organize with your knowledge graph, and that could grow even more when others join in. I think that goes way beyond note-taking. I believe that the whole ecosystem, it just needs time to find its path. So it's difficult now to predict how this gap between our need to have coherent shared graphs and the individual way we curate our own knowledge, how could they match in a way that is reusable? Because it might be that certain things which look promising that work for open knowledge graphs and for enterprise knowledge graphs would not work for personal knowledge graphs. They're a different kind of beast.
Yeah, and along those lines, both Jerry and Jeff have been talking a lot about simple associations, and Yuri mentioned that even simple associations are really powerful and underutilized, presumably. And so, should we really be focused on just the simple associations rather than the metadata at this point?
I do not really look at things like typing and this kind of work as, of course, it should be balanced in a way that in many cases, when you would like to increase the utility of your tool with additional semantics for querying or for future use, you start serving the tool more than it serves you. You should focus on your core work, and things come somehow naturally. For that, things like NLP would be of great use. But at the same time, this just associating something, I think, is not helping enough. I believe that personal knowledge graphs, like any other knowledge graph, should treat the relationships as first-class citizens. They should have semantics, hierarchies, relationships between them, and they should be highly reusable. But at the same time, you should enable that new relationship emerge, and you change the way you would treat all these relationships, yet so that once you share that, it's also understandable by others. So that's the balance that needs to be maintained. The other important balance is how you basically write just write as simple as possible without the need to do so many things around writing or connecting or whatever you're doing with your personal data. But at the same time, you actually weave the graph as densely as possible, because this will make it more useful.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say, like, to answer that question, I'd answer that question a little bit differently, Alan. Like, I think you asked, like, should we focus on just associations, maybe like some blunt associations, or for the metadata? Was that what you asked, Alan?
Yeah, that's basically it.
So I think that the answer is neither, right? We should focus on the user. Like, we should focus on like what is like a good experience, and right now that is the associations, because I mean, it's something to learn, but once you learn it, it's actually quite simple, right? And that being said, the hardest problem with all these tools and any new technology is adoption. So I think that, yeah, there's definitely a use case for all that metadata, and that's a research, like a design space that we're looking at very closely. But where is knowledge like being produced at the end of the day at most organizations? It's on Slack. And so, like, are we gonna like just change that fact? Like, it's like a very simple interface. Are we gonna, like, we don't want to stop people from sending messages. We don't want to stop them from having meetings. Like, those are always going to be necessary. But even if we could link between our chat applications and, you know, Athens, that's something that we're looking into very closely as well, because just the ability to do that is enough as anchor points to finding like that original context.
So it could be that what we're describing here turns out to be a new job category in 10 years, right? So 30 years ago, if you had tried to find a graphic facilitator for an event, everybody would have been like, what are you talking about? Never heard of graphic facilitation or graphic recording. Today, you go on the inner tubes, you type in graphic recorder, you'll get 50 of them. Several of them are really good friends of mine. It's a thing. And everybody's been to an event where somebody's drawing on large sheets of paper on the wall during the meeting. And I have these immense regrets that when they write income inequality in Magic Marker or Pastel, they're not actually connecting through to the concept of income inequality and all the richness associated with it. It's like, so close. So I'm thinking that this curation of what matters, of knowledge, right? Knowledge management has been a thing for 34 years and has struggled and had a really hard time, mostly because we dealt with it in like this databasey way that didn't really work. That was very command and control and very, let's parse things aside, let's build a big ontology and so forth. What we're talking about here is informal chatter happens on Slack and Mattermost and chats and wherever else. And there may need to be some people whose role it is to curate the best of and put it in places where it's persistent and more important than your average chat, which then changes over time and becomes like the more definitive record of knowledge for that entity. And if we're really lucky, entities in particular like scientific researchers and academics will publish those things for the real world to see, as opposed to only writing papers. Because right now the nugget of information for them to make their research public is like a damn scientific paper with good footnotes at the end. And that's just like so old school. It's not actually thinking together, right? So I think we're moving into a world where we get to think together in new ways, but which might require some new roles to get pioneered as well.
So yeah, I agree completely. We discovered this insight, the same insight, just by talking to prospective users of Athens. So there's this research, there's this think policy group in India, Takshashila, and they're I think the oldest one, and they were using Obsidian at their think tank or public policy. Yeah, I think it's both. Public policy group. There were 30 plus researchers. They were all using Obsidian in a Dropbox folder. They had a bunch of merge conflicts all the time. That being said, they eventually came up with the conventions that everyone just has to write their own file, So, you know, that it is what it is. That being said, there was about 30 researchers, and then 7 or 8 of the junior researchers, they didn't write research all day. All they did was read all the senior researchers and then create a curation page that linked to all of the related papers, because the senior researchers don't have time to read the other researchers. So
Yeah,
excellent.
really interesting stuff. And I'm wondering, we're trying to brainstorm here together on and sort of stand on each other's shoulders in a sense. And since we're doing that, I'm wondering, okay, why aren't we capturing this in a richer way so that the findings of the brainstorming don't get lost? I mean, we can all take notes on what we've been doing here, and that's certainly useful, and we can share those. But there's this notion called life logging that's been around for 20 years, the fully recordable life, and I posted a link to a Spanish scientist that's been doing that for a long time. Do you think that we all ought to be sort of logging just as a habitual thing, sessions like these, so that we and it's a matter of, how do you handle the privacy issues, obviously, but in general, Jerry, you've probably thought about this as much as anybody.
So I'm trying to do exactly what you're describing, Alan. So I put a link in the chat a little earlier for the node for this panel in my brain, and I'm connecting it up as we go to things, and then later I will post-process the new tabs that I've got open from interesting things people sent, and I'm trying to make it so that it's durable, so that it's useful 10 years down the road. So I have several audiences in mind when I'm busy curating my brain. One of them is me, because I want to be able to find stuff. But I've been publishing my brain now for more than 15 years. So I'm aware that other people might bump into it, and they won't know why I put what where. And some people hit my brain without me around to guide them, and they have a fine time, and they find stuff, and they've learned that when they have a new topic in their lives, they go look in my brain first, because I publish it openly. Other people are like, Jerry, whenever you're talking me through my brain, that works, but I can't find my way around without you, which I totally understand, right? And so separate the ViewMaster, the view graph tool from the data, and all of a sudden you can shift to a form of viewing, a form of data representation that maybe works for other people. And so I think what's funny is there's all these subcategories, right? I pointed to some of them in my brain, and there's a whole bunch of us with little fan groups working on little pieces of the problem around the world. We're not actually talking with each other. And my fear is that if we talked with each other, we'd be busy trying to homogenize our ideas rather than create this very diverse, rich environment within which we can sort of share ideas and preserve individual perspectives without violating privacy regs in different ways. So I think it's actually a hard problem, but it's a really happy problem. And people like me, I'm trying to publish everything openly. I have 480,000+ nodes in my brain, of which I have marked less than 0.5%, maybe less than that, as private. So there's a little attribute on any thought. There's a checkbox I can check that says make this private, so that it's visible only if you're logged in as me, and hopefully that's only me usually. And there's no state secrets in there. I did a corporate presentation where nobody in the outside world should know that I spoke to that corporation. But the people from the corporation that I met, I connected them also to Company A staff, which is visible and public, and you could find your way there. So there's only, in that event, there were only a couple things that were private, and everything else is public. And if more of us were working in public a lot, but we're synthesizing our work a lot, because if all of us work in public and we pour every day's notes out, we're dead. We're just all going to drown. We're just all going to drown. And if it's in 50 different representational schemes, it's going to look like the Tower of Babel. But if we can sort out levels of synthesis above our note-taking and do our note-taking in whatever thing brings us joy, it's the Marie Kondo thing. Like the thing that sparks joy is the tool you should use. And then how do we layer metadata and make all that data visible and public? Yeah. But then importantly, how do we crunch it, distill it, deglaze it, synthesize it, make it so that when people come in, they find the best of?
Yeah.
And my feeling for what's best of is going to be different from Evo's. And there may be a 60% overlap on a particular topic, and that's great, but somebody might find it really interesting to see what topics in this, in an answer to this question, where do Evo and Jerry disagree? And machine learning could sort of do that if we were publishing our information publicly, and if there were some machine learning that were smart enough to do this, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make me think of, I've had several conversations with Yuri recently, and Yuri's made me realize that in terms of the data life cycle that we want to support each phase of it. The collection phase is really critical, and it's really not focused on it sufficiently enough. And so what you're talking about, Jerry and Jeff, is just doing the collection and sharing. And so Yuri's point seems to be, okay, let's wait on the metadata. Let's get everything out there on the table to begin with. And then we can do more of the accessibility structuring, so to speak, that seems to be necessary at some point. Does that make sense to you all, or what are your thoughts on that?
There was this research, I forgot what was the name of the book. I'll find it quickly in a few minutes. But basically, the outcome was that we tend to collect way more than we actually use, because at the moment of collecting, it has high perceived value, which later on in different contexts it loses it. So we are scavenging a lot of digital stuff, and then one of the reasons could be because we do not know what could be the future use of it. And the other would be that traditionally we collect without associating. So that's maybe the reason Jerry is doing something highly reusable. But his case is different because he's really doing it in public. And in that sense, that's more like digital gardening, which is growing recently. I shared a link to a brief history of digital gardening. Although most of these digital gardens, they're not done in the way Jerry is doing the brain, but still it is learning in public with all the benefits, and having half-baked things that you just grow, and that I think that is a particular manifestation of that. That doesn't cover the whole space of personal knowledge graphs.
Certainly not. But Jerry, you had some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just want to jump in for a second, because I keep trying to sort of pull my head up from the details and think big picture. And I think one of the...
I think you muted yourself, Jerry. Or you got muted.
I'm so sorry. So I keep looking up for the bigger picture, and one of the things I think we're doing is reinventing books, for example. I'm one of those folks who thinks that PDF is where information goes to die. And I'm increasingly seeing books as little prisons for civilization's best ideas, because they're overprotected by DRM. It's hard to actually take ideas out of books and use them in the world. And the authors would like to make a living, but they'd also love their ideas to influence everybody and to be put into practical use, right? So part of what I'm looking for is, how do we actually make useful these things? I'll give everybody a brief example. There's a pattern language by Liberating Structures all about how to do good facilitation. One of their patterns is called 1, 2, 4, all. It basically says, if you have a complex question in a big group, give them some time by themselves, put them in pairs, put them in quads, bring them back to plenary. 1, 2, 4, all. Making that available more means letting me read about the pattern and use it. Making it useful means writing a zap, basically a Zoom applet, that I say, oh, I'd like to do 1, 2, 4, all, press button, and all of the stupid choreography that has to happen behind the curtain to make people into pairs, happens automatically with some software, because software is good at that kind of thing. And now we've taken some knowledge that was buried in a pattern language written on a website that's brilliant but obscure, Liberating Structures, I think .com, and we've actually made it useful and usable to everybody. How do we tease things out and do that over and over and over and over again for one another, so that our meetings are smarter, so that our memories are better, so that our research is like active in the world, all those kinds of things. I think we're on the cusp now of dropping, the story goes that the first movies were actually cameras put in front of a stage because everybody knew what theater was. And then somebody invents the dolly pan, and then somebody invents jump cuts, and then et cetera, et cetera. Eisenstein and a bunch of others create the vocabulary of cinema. We are sitting here looking at damned books, and web pages look like magazines because that's what we knew. And we're not breaking through that at all. And the D-Web is so damn focused on Bitcoin and blockchain and money that it's missing that the distribution of information is really important here. And we could create a shared memory for civilization, which we could use to solve our problems. And there's plenty of problems to solve.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
I agree there. I think one of the more interesting, I guess, like innovations in the space is discourse graphs, which I linked to by Joel Chan. I think Cortex Future worked on a little bit, as well as David Vargas, who developed many of like Roam plugins. And without jumping into formal semantics, it does define a very small language for academic research with 3 types of entities and 2 types of relationships for the most part. It's like question, there's a question type, an evidence type, and a claim. Question, evidence, claim. And then the relationships that these can have are supports or like informs, I think supports or like, refutes essentially. That is basically a complete, I mean, it's not, to me, that seems like it's a Turing complete language in the sense of, at least in knowledge management, because you can just decompose a paper, which might be, dozens of pages, hundreds of pages long in a PDF format to the central points of like, what are the questions this paper is asking? What are the claims it's making? What evidence does it have, right? And then you could reuse that. Now I could write my own paper and reuse that, basically calling that as a module in the same way that code is called as a module on GitHub. So almost like a GitHub for knowledge. And then when you have this, then those papers can grow over time, right? In the same way you can version libraries of code and version APIs, now you could reference the same place, but say, oh, actually, the claims made in this paper were wrong. And we could see all the papers that depended on that paper and back propagate the entire network of research and knowledge that was done from that original one, right? In the same way that we can update our dependencies throughout all, thousands and thousands of applications and code bases just by saying, okay, this one's wrong. I think that would be very compelling.
Yeah.
Something similar is done by Blue Brain Nexus, by the way.
So what do you mean by that, Eva? What have you seen specifically?
Well, they have a sophisticated way of following provenance. So you can get data from, they're focused on neuroscience, so they can get laboratory data from various sources and interconnect and find the provenance of every claim when they do simulations of brains. And they use very interesting knowledge graph for that, very much using open standards like Shackle. Mm-hmm. So everything is open source, so you can just have a look and reuse it, repurpose it.
Yeah. So that was Blue Brain Nexus that you're talking about, the Swiss project.
Yeah.
And Yuri's also talked about coding as conversation. So, we talked about different development models, and IPFS could be like the base layer for this GitHub, immutable data store plus versioning that is conversational, and that leads to usable code in some sense. Have you all thought in those directions at all? I mean, we're just producing lots and lots of siloed code and reinventing the wheel every day. And is there a way to get beyond that and use conversation like the kind we're talking about to do that?
I feel like we're not doing we're not like reinventing the wheel too much, right? This is like the whole purpose of open source, right? Like we get to use just like dozens of libraries like React, which is like thousands of lines of code, and make Athens. Like imagine if we could reinvent that. Like I think that like code is actually pretty solid in terms of, we've got NPM, we've got Python, we've got like Maven for Java. Like code is being reused like pretty well, I would say. It's knowledge that is lacking.
Well, I think that if you read the book Software Wasteland, you might come to a different conclusion. And it has to do with enterprise architecture and how much is just wasted in terms of development cost. So I think it depends on your vantage point. The open source community notwithstanding, there's an awful lot of code that's being generated that just gets stranded in one form or fashion, and the application-centric architecture is part of that issue. So we're trying to become more data-centric here and just focus on enough applications to make things usable rather than reinventing or just perpetuating the provincial data sprawl and code siloing.
Does anybody else on the call want to ask questions?
Yeah, let's see. Veronica had a question here. Let me see what it was. Wish we had ways to bring them up on audio. Information overload is the biggest issue, but because machines can help sort and filter, but in the end, we need to read it in all forms. And so that goes to the point of, how do we make machines help us more with this sort of filtering? And that's a big topic, but is there anything that, Jerry, you have some thoughts on that, perhaps?
Sure. I've got a challenge I haven't issued yet, just haven't had the bandwidth for it. But so the brain exports into JSON objects, and we've kind of dumped my brain somewhere. And I wanted to issue a challenge that says, hey, designers, would you like to come in and play with a bunch of data, like a large heap of data, because I've got more than 480,000 thoughts in my brain after 24 years of feeding it. And then come up with lots of different interesting things to do with it. Some of which would be at the user interface level, user experience, but some of which would be, and I've got a whole subset of machine learning ideas, ways that machine learning could in fact help. One of which I described a little bit earlier, which was, hey, that looks like an author, shall I tag them up and add metadata? And another one would be, hey, you're talking to Alan and Ivo and Jeff, and here are two topics you all have in common, and I've ordered a beer, near each of you so that you can sit down and have a nice conversation tonight, or what have you. And I can come up with like a half dozen to a dozen different ways in which machine learning could be super helpful here. A friend of mine in a recent conversation said, oh, by the way, your brain might be really good training feedstock for machine learning. And I'd never thought about it the other way around. I've always thought about how could machine learning sort of help me and us in these kinds of conversations to clean things up, to ask questions quickly, to do whatever. But I was like, oh, that's super interesting. I just don't know what to do with that. So I think there's a whole bunch of things that are easily possible here.
Yeah, and I think that people have been experimenting with what you're talking about, Jerry, and I'm wondering if others on our panel today have come across the same sort of thing where we've got something along the lines of structured information or contextualized information that is used for the training sets for machine learning, and even something like Jerry's efforts would seem to help us sort of accelerate the process of training in a machine learning context. Any thoughts about that, Jeff or Ivo? I know, for example, Jerry, that KBpedia was sort of developed with that in mind, and so if you got word to vectorization approach that's using machine learning or phrase to vec or sentence to vec, that using a knowledge graph in conjunction with that would certainly accelerate and make the process more accurate.
I've seen a number of demos on Twitter from people working on some of these like NLP techniques being applied, such as word to vector. And some other use cases I've seen there are like asking for prompts, specifically like the AI being like a tool to generate prompts. I'm like, okay, what is it that you thought about like this? Or like, what is the relationship between what you're writing about now and this other node that you wrote about? And then of course there's like the, just like train on my entire knowledge base and write something in the way I would write it. And like what you already know about what I know about this topic, right? Like write the paper for me, right?
Yeah.
Basically, like that's the dream, right? That's the grail.
Well, I mean, but already we're seeing GPT-3 and things like it being asked to come up with 6 different drafts, and then the writer picks the best pieces from the different drafts and assembles the final piece, and that's actually working pretty well already. So it may be really hard to say, write me the best piece ever about this thing, but boy, you can create a variety, and humans are really good at choosing from among, where it's really hard to invent new, to write like fresh novel text. I know that my explanations about a bunch of things, I've found a groove to explain things. It's a little bit like the mule that knows that the feed is right over there and it's not going to deviate from the path. But if GPT-3 could come up with variants, that'd be really fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question there. That being said, like that could be done probably right on like, any of these tools. So the question, I guess, for me as like someone trying to make like a differentiated product, right, is like how those tools or how that AI application could be differentiated within Athens, or which already has some degree of structure as an outliner with backlinks, and if we added additional metadata and typed links and typed entities, would the AI capabilities or results be better than if it was just a folder with like 1,000 markdown files? That's a question I don't know.
Yeah. Well, of course, there are those who are using the techniques that we've been talking about to publish things like sports scores and summaries of football games, for example. And so the journalists are being augmented by machines in that way. And back when I was at PwC, we were doing some research on this feedback loop, this human-machine feedback loop, the cybernetic situation we're in now, where I don't know how often you all use Google, but as a researcher, I use it. I can't do without it, really. So I'm sort of thinking with Google a lot of times. And so where is that headed? I mean, we've got some means of interacting with machines, but it seems like we could do so much more.
Unfortunately, we're busy replacing humans in a lot of tasks. I mean, there's a huge problem right now in that there's too much effort to replace humans and not enough to augment them. And the augment conversation, where Doug Engelbart gave us a beautiful example in 1968, right? And in The Mother of All Demos, the augment part really hasn't gone anywhere. A few groups here and there have played with it, but it hasn't. Steve Jobs gave us personal computing and transformed it, and he fought networking. When the first engineers were trying to create the original Apple Talk, there's a story that he shows up in one engineer's cubicle, looks and says, "What are you doing?" He says, I'm building like a network. You can just use these barrel connectors and connect up our new Macintoshes. And he's like, "No, you're not." Picks it up and throws it across the room. Just like he had to be convinced to add a hard drive, because that little floppy drive with a multi-speed floppy was going to be enough. So Steve Jobs was blind in some ways and brilliant in other kinds of ways. But this vision that was given to him by Engelbart and then later Kay and Ted Nelson and Elaborate, we don't have that. And Ted Nelson is living a difficult life now, wishing that the internet and the web were the Xanadu project, but they're not, right? We don't have Xanadu. And things like what Jeff is building have something closer to transclusion, and Geary should jump in because he's an expert on these sorts of things, closer to transclusion, which was one of Ted Nelson's wish list items, than anything. And yet, I don't know where that takes us.
Yeah, exactly. So define transclusion for those of us who haven't read Ted Nelson. And Gary's been sending me links to Alan Kay's talks. I have to listen to those. But
I think Gary's the one who has to define transclusion.
Yeah.
It's above, an actual good working definition of it is above my pay grade.
Well, Yuri says that Xanadu is here. And maybe that's the William Gibson insight, which is that, the future is here. It's just less evenly distributed. So people are doing this. We just don't know where they are, what they're doing.
So to play with that, given some recent current events, like Facebook just rebranded itself Meta, is going whole hog betting the farm on the metaverse, et cetera. And the metaverse vision that they presented would have been laughable in 1995. It's pretty old school. It's pretty boring. It's resource consumptive, et cetera. This conversation here is also about a form of a metaverse. And I think a much richer, more interesting one. How our thinking merges together, how we figure out how to solve our problems, how we represent these sorts of things is a metaverse problem. And so I'm very interested in a better verse. Yeah. Like I bought thebetterverse.org just as a joke after the Facebook announcement, and I haven't really put much on it, but I'd love to host conversations about, hey, that metaverse vision is really tired, and I really don't want Facebook to co-opt the notion of a metaverse. Why don't we show what might be better?
Yeah, and I think we're thinking along the same lines here. It's disappointing that the metaverse term has been co-opted, but it is an ancient term anyway. So let's come up with a different term for that. And Yuri's going to be demoing his Indieverse at the working group session on Friday. So folks are invited to that, and if you want to listen in, I'll be happy to add you to the mailing list. So, Yuri, do you have an elevator pitch for your Indieverse that we could see in the chat? And we've got maybe 15 minutes to go here. What haven't we covered that we should be covering? Ivo, are there nagging thoughts about what we haven't talked about yet that you'd like to hear in the next 15 minutes or so?
I think we jumped ahead with all these great ideas that Jerry is bringing. And I'm not sure if people should not just make the steps to discover things from themselves and reach the point where we need to go to the next level. Because after all, this is about personal knowledge graphs. Of course, you changed it to also add collaborative knowledge graphs. But I think these are two different streams that would meet at some point each other. One is to have a better way to manage your knowledge for life, and I think that thing is coming from Woolman's Zettelkasten approach that influenced a lot of these tools, by the way. And the other is how do we collaborate to have better decisions, to share knowledge, to solve difficult problems. But these are two things which could live independently until they naturally find a way to coexist. I'm not sure that starting from one would be the right place to go to the other, because it has certain technical limitations that would steer the direction, and many other possible paths will seem not as attractive, but they might be the better paths. And in terms of this thing around GPT-3, which I have no very high opinion of, I think the whole artificial intelligence and machine learning stuff is I believe going a bit in the wrong direction. James even said that we don't need artificial intelligence. We need to use AI for alien intelligence to complement what we are missing, and we can focus to extend what we have. But also just from the technical level, how would something that relies heavily on historical data would account for sudden shift of my interests when I engage with mine or somebody else's knowledge? And I think we should just find the right place for that, but I don't have knowledge is a human thing. It's not it's not an artificial thing.
No, you're right, and so I'm thinking that you know, the discoverability that you're talking about already exists to some extent. I mean, if you're using Twitter as a research tool, you're following people that are resonating with you from a subject perspective, for example. They're sharing links that are illuminating. If you're listening to Pandora, you're getting recommendations from Pandora that are based on their graph approach, so to speak. So I you know, it seems like we're working at the edges of what you're talking about. Or are you talking about, am I misinterpreting?
I'm not sure how the discoverability is connected to basically the two layers that we go around. One is working and curating your personal information, and the other is sharing knowledge and using the collaboration to solve difficult problems. So discoverability, I think, is just present at all levels. It's not something that would be related to one of them only.
Yeah. Well, I think that perhaps the challenge at the personal level is just getting to that initial accessibility. So there, you know, the thing about this is that there's so many different ways of considering personal knowledge graphs and how they should get started. So maybe in the remaining time would each think about, okay, if you're just getting started with this topic, where do you begin? What's the most, you know, what would you do first? Jerry, what would you do first if you're just getting started with this?
It's weird because what I've experienced over time is that different humans bump into a different tool, and some people have tried a whole lot of tools and none of them stuck and they don't like any of them. Some people hit one and they just like, you know, MindJet has been around forever. MindJet is sort of, you know, prehistoric in terms of mind mapping and somehow still around. But there's a bunch of people who like MindJet and use it all the time. For me, it's like if you could sort of do a little flight of tools and try a couple different things to see which one actually works for you, that would be really useful, as opposed to just bumping into one by accident and going, oh, this is sort of okay. I was coaching somebody who was a new user of the brain recently, and I realized that it's not obvious how to set things up, and I use it in a quirky way, which is not evident from sort of the packaging or the use. And 2 years ago, I had a call with 2 other black belt brain users, and each of us was using the brain completely different from the others. One of us was using the brain in a way I barely understood. He was using every advanced feature that I've ignored in ways that just didn't make sense at the end of the day. And I was like, wow, you know, if I were the inventor of this piece of software, I'd be getting very contradictory requests for the next generation of features, right? So I'd say go explore and try a few things. The things I love about the brain are few, and probably easily replicable in other sorts of places, but I don't see them anywhere else. So for me, it's like, man, this is a complicated question because the tools are all partial and quirky.
Yeah.
And so you know, dive in, try something, and lather, rinse, repeat. I have the good fortune that this one tool stuck for a long time, so I have the weird benefit of 24 years of curating a single map. And that changes my perspective on a whole bunch of stuff, and it informs me in ways that are really interesting. And as sort of came out in this conversation, which I didn't realize that much, my use of it and curation of it is often predicated on long-term usefulness. I'm trying to keep it from becoming a hornet's nest or a thicket of twine that nobody, including me, can make their way through.
And that's a frustrating thing about your hard disk and
Totally.
your virtual stores, is that it's just a boneyard of thinking, and how do you actually enliven it so that you can harness it better. Good point there, Jerry. Jeff, any thoughts from your perspective? How would you get started with what you've been talking about? Is it just a matter of opening up the tool and trying to do with it what you can, or how do people find it most effective?
Yeah, I guess that's a really good question. Well, I think there's like one answer is that you can just try a bunch of tools and see which ones stick, or get a bunch of demos, like get a demo from Jerry on how he looks at the brain, or I used to watch the video, or get a demo of how we use Athens internally as a team or individually, and see if it clicks. I think at this point though, like it just may not click for everyone, because not everyone necessarily needs one, right? Not everyone does need to take notes. Not everyone does need to have like a good systematic process for doing this. And where it is most effective is where people are consuming and producing like a lot of knowledge. And so really you can think of it as like a note-taking app for professional knowledge workers, right? And so a lot of those people are professors, PhDs, like students who are just reading and writing a lot. So I would say that it is possible for everyone to use a note-taking app, and Apple Notes probably has millions, and Google Keep have so many users. That's fine for many people. It's just not worth it for everyone to switch over yet. That's not to say it won't be worth it one day. But if you want more people to get, I guess, into this, there have to be other aspects that do make it more approachable, such as having something more social or collaborative. And that's sort of why we've come out this way. So when someone just uses Twitter for a little bit, it's actually you can kind of see that this is a knowledge graph. And it's not super complex necessarily. In fact, the constraints are just make it easy to get your head around. But once you realize that you just especially once you're replying and quote tweeting and retweeting other people, I mean, you're doing thinking in public, you're learning in public, and you're building a knowledge graph in public for others. And so I think there's a way to go about it too.
Yeah.
I'd be a little leery. There's a few people who are just really religious, I wrote in the chat, about their approach. So I think it was a Tony Buzan video, but I was watching one from one of the old school mappers. And he was really the colors I use are really important and you should use them this way. I'm like, what complete bullshit. Not generally important to mind mapping broadly, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a different kind of orthodoxy, which is people coming from some ontological, semantic, whatever perspective, who believe that the device and the tool must obey these ontological rules. And I got to tell you that if the brain had enforced any kind of logic and reasoning and ontologies and whatnot, or if the brain had forced me to communicate with others before I added something to it, et cetera, I just would never have used it. It would not have stuck. And so there's somehow this sweet spot between usability and rigor. and my brain doesn't have a lot of rigor, and I'm praying and counting on machine learning and other things coming in later to enhance and layer on the kinds of metadata that I know would be useful. And I think that that's entirely doable in really productive ways. But I'd be leery of people who are religious about it. But then there's other people like Tiago Forte, which is building a second brain, and there's several other people like him who are making a living showing people, hey, from soup to nuts, I take notes at an event and it turns into this thing that I can use over and over again. Some of those are really highly functional, and they've done a lot of the hard work of picking tools and methods for you. And if you can adapt it to your own uses, probably that's a good thing, right? And there's a few people out there kind of making a living doing that. So maybe one path here is to go watch some YouTube videos, figure out a couple people who resonate for you, and then adopt their methods and techniques, and they'll be happy to have the additional audience.
Yeah, that sounds interesting too. Ivo, I'm going to give you the last word here. Since we're up on the hour almost.
These are great points. I fully subscribe to them, both what Jeff and Jerry said. I would just like to bring a different perspective. Like you can just look at what you do and get one aspect of it. For example, information retrieval. You're doing something like you're writing a document or making a presentation. So imagine you're using Word to write a document. I'm personally very frustrated when I write in Word, and while I'm writing, I need to leave the tool to find my emails, to find my bookmarks, to find my other documents, to find things from slides, to find all these things. I need to go somewhere else because my data is trapped in these different tools with their own views of how data should be managed. And that is for me at least, a big trigger before going out and trying out different tools.
Yeah.
But I think we're conditioned to not expect much from tools like Office tools.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point too. And the frustration, I'm sure, shared by everybody. And all I would say is that there are knowledge graphs that are being built underneath those common applications. And so you could, for example, share what's open for you from multiple apps with the rest of the team, and they could collaborate with you in that virtual space. So that's a sort of a stopgap approach, but it does address in some tactical way part of the problem you're pointing to.
If you're looking to end exactly on the top of the hour, I'll stop. But otherwise, I'd love to throw something in that builds on what Ivo just said.
Okay, please do.
Good. I'll do it quick. So years ago, a friend of mine, Kenneth Tyler, had a wiki called SeedWiki, and he and I experimented with SeedWiki. He would write some code, and I would try it out. And we made his wiki act like a blog and like PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
So to make his wiki look like PowerPoint, there would be one page that was a table of contents page for all of the slides in a presentation. He made a button that when I pressed it said, turn this page into a presentation. So a presentation becomes a playlist, or a playlist is a presentation. And then every page was just a wiki page, living in the wiki. And his little thing would, go full screen and give me left and right arrows. And as you went click, 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 you would basically be going through pages in the wiki, any one of which was now reusable and version controlled.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning I could say, show me the presentation we showed DuPont last month, and then bring it all up to date. And because wikis keep timestamps, like it changes what our presentation is instead of attaching goddamn PPT files and shipping them around on email, right? And then we made his wiki look like a blog by saying, hey, here's a page which is a landing page for a blog. All it does is it looks inside the wiki namespace for every page tagged with the name of this blog, sorts them reverse chronological, and puts something between all of the entries that looks and smells like blog partitions, right? And so every blog post was actually a wiki page. And I love wikis, and I'm surprised we're not actually using wikis to communicate a lot more. But every blog post was a wiki page, except you could look at it as a blog, which is the torrent that we're all drowning in,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we're not experimenting very much. We're not doing things like that. And it makes me sad because we're sort of locking into old views of what media is even capable of doing. And I wish we did. I wish we did more fun stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a great point. As open as we're trying to be, at least we're still leaving some things, some rocks unturned, and we should be more diligent about that. I'm going to leave it here for now, since we're past the hour, and appreciate all the folks who have joined today. Thanks especially to our panelists.